If you're hunting for a gaming PC that actually lets you sit down, fire up a game, and enjoy it without spending a small fortune on upgrades, you've probably already felt that little knot of doubt. You wonder whether the machine will handle the titles you love, whether it'll run cool enough for long sessions, and if it's going to feel like a waste of money when the next big release drops. That hesitation is real, and the last thing you want is a system that looks impressive on paper but leaves you tweaking settings for hours just to get 30 frames per second in a mainstream title. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started looking at pre-built gaming rigs, I kept circling back to three practical questions. How much gaming can I actually do out of the box? How much heat and noise will the machine generate in a typical apartment or dorm room? And will the price point leave room in my budget for peripherals, a decent monitor, or perhaps a future upgrade? The Skytech Storm with an AMD Ryzen 5 5500 and an RTX 3050 checks a lot of those boxes, but it also has a few trade-offs that are easy to overlook if you just skim the spec sheet. First off, who should consider this PC? If you're a casual gamer who mostly plays titles like Fortnite, Apex Legends, or Valorant at 1080p, and you occasionally dip into more demanding games like Cyberpunk 2077 or Red Dead Redemption 2 at medium settings, the Storm hits a sweet spot. The Ryzen 5 5500, with its 6 cores and a boost up to 4.2 GHz, handles modern engines without choking, and the RTX 3050 gives you enough ray tracing headroom to enjoy the visual boost in games that support it, though you'll still need to dial down a few settings for the most demanding titles. The included 1TB NVMe SSD is a real time saver. Loading worlds and open-world games drops from minutes to seconds, and you won't have to juggle external drives for your library. If you're a streamer who wants to run OBS alongside a game, the 16GB of DDR4 RAM at 3200 MHz provides a comfortable cushion. In my testing, running a 1080p stream while playing a fast-paced shooter didn't cause any stutter, and the 650W Gold PSU gave the system a bit of breathing room for those occasional power spikes. The Wi-Fi 5 802.11 AC module is decent for most apartments, and the fact that Skytech ships the unit with Windows 11 and no bloatware means you can jump straight into your game or your streaming setup without hunting down unwanted trial software. Now, who should skip this build? If your main focus is 1440p or 4K gaming, the RTX 3050 will start to feel underpowered quickly. It can push 1080p at 60 frames per second in many games, but at higher resolutions you'll run into frame rate ceilings that can't be fixed by tweaking settings. Likewise, if you're an enthusiast who plans to overclock heavily or swap out components frequently, the high-performance air cooler that comes with the Storm is adequate for stock performance but may struggle if you push the CPU beyond its stock boost. Heavy overclockers often prefer a closed-loop liquid cooler or a larger heatsink with more fan stages. One practical strength that many buyers miss is the way the internal layout is designed for cable management. Skytech routes the power cables behind the motherboard tray, and the SSD sits on a dedicated M.2 slot without a heatsink that would block airflow. In a real-world setup on a modest desk, this translates to a quieter experience. During a 3-hour playthrough of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the fan stayed below 30 dBA, which is hardly noticeable over the game's soundtrack. That quiet operation is a hidden win for anyone sharing a room with a roommate or a partner who's sensitive to noise. On the flip side, the case itself is a bit on the smaller side, which means you'll have limited space for future upgrades. The PSU is solid, but it's a proprietary size that doesn't fit every aftermarket unit if you ever decide to replace it. Also, the graphics output options are fairly basic, just an HDMI and a single DisplayPort, so multi-monitor setups will need an adapter or a docking solution. If you envision a dual-monitor workflow for streaming, you'll need to plan for that accessory budget. Another nuance is the Wi-Fi versus Ethernet question. The built-in Wi-Fi 5 is fine for most home networks, but if you're in a crowded apartment complex where wireless spectrums are congested, you might notice occasional latency spikes in fast-paced shooters. Plugging into the Ethernet port eliminates that variable, and the Storm's motherboard includes a decent gigabit Ethernet controller, so it's an easy fix if you run into any wireless hiccups. From a value perspective, the Storm's $1,099 price point, subject to change, is anchored by the SSD and the GPU. Most pre-built machines at a similar price would either skimp on storage or drop down to an older card like the GTX 1660 Super. By including the RTX 3050, Skytech gives you access to DLSS and ray tracing features that were previously reserved for higher-end rigs. This makes the Storm a good entry point for gamers.